Hello. Today's conversation is with Miles McConnell, who is a classical guitar player who I met back at the University of Wisconsin-Madison when he was working on his doctorate and I was working on my bachelor's in music composition. And we were both in Javier Calderon's classical guitar studio, and we met playing in guitar ensemble and through master classes and things like that. In our conversation today, we get into the world of classical guitar and how that relates to flamenco and country and jazz and all other forms of guitar. We talk about arranging and what the role of guitar is in an ensemble and how guitar can be used as its own full ensemble. But before we get to that, please remember to like, leave a comment, and subscribe to my channel. And if you would like to consider supporting my content generally, please visit my Patreon page. Also, for patrons who are willing to pledge just $1 a month, you get access to write-in questions for Ask Me Anything episodes or to ask to guests on the podcast. Welcome to Music in Mind with Anthony Calkin. Hello, everybody. This is Miles McConnell. He is a classical guitarist, and we met at the University of Wisconsin-Madison many years ago when Miles was working on his doctorate and I was working on my bachelor's, but we were both in Javier Calderon's classical guitar studio. And I think we got to play one semester, maybe 2 semesters of guitar ensemble together. And I remember going to your classical guitar recital at the press house, the Presbyterian house, where you played some Bach, and I was just like blown away by your ability to play such a complex and I don't know, that piece really blew me away because it's such a feat taking on a piece like that.
Wow, thanks.
I think it was the Prelude, Allegro, and Fugue, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Prelude, Fugue, and Allegro in that order. Yep. But I mean, you got all you got the Holy Trinity, and that's sort of a joke, but not really. Actually, at one point, I remember somebody playing that piece for Pepe Romero in a master class, and him saying, "This is the holy of the holies." In terms of this piece this is just such a masterpiece, and for guitar repertoire, it's a curious one. It was originally written for this. Maybe you know this, Anthony, but it was written for, I think, an instrument that was something like the Lautenwerk. I'm probably pronouncing that incorrectly, but It was like a lute keyboard.
Okay.
Now, Bach, as you know, was very interested in all the different kinds of developments that were happening in instrument building during his time, and anything that was kind of new and innovative in terms of instruments, he was actually very interested in that. And so this was a kind of, I think it had strings similar to a lute, and it sounded similar to the lute, but it was a keyboard. And then I think maybe scholars think that he perhaps transcribed it to lute. And so I think it maybe exists in a couple of different iterations, but it has become a staple of the classical guitar repertoire. And it's
of course.
Yeah, and it's a big piece. It's been a while since I've played that particular one. It'd be nice to dust that off. Bach is always a big project. I've started to feel the itch again for Bach, because it's been certainly pre-pandemic for me in terms of playing Bach, at least really sinking my teeth. Maybe I played a movement or two here or there, but really sinking my teeth into a larger work. It's been a couple of years. I was playing actually a great transcription by Denis Osabagic of the solo flute partita in A minor, which is it's not one that's played quite as much. David Russell recorded it, and it's really a fantastic. I mean, anything by Bach really is good. Everything's pretty good if it's by Bach. Yeah. But yeah, Bach. I mean, for us as classical musicians and classical guitarists, Bach is kind of the pinnacle in a lot of ways.
Right.
There's just, it's like the music is sort of firing on all cylinders.
Yes.
Everything is happening, and there's so much depth to it. I think it's one of a very small handful of types of repertoire that I think you can never really tire of as a performer.
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, you might get tired you might get fatigued, but you won't grow sort of bored of it. I don't think ever, because it's so deep and so musically dense, but in a great way.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. I use, the most basic piece ever by Bach. Everybody knows it, the C major prelude from the Well-Tempered Clavier, as a composition model for teaching students how to start to think about long-term through composed structures that have a sense throughout, because the voice leading in it is out of this world, but it's also really weird in its own way. It has all these little inconsistencies and these little peculiarities to the way it's composed specifically.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the structure is so perfect, but so surprising at the same time. It's like I was having this conversation recently. It's like, I've heard actually Leonard Bernstein has this really great little video that you can find where he's talking. If you look it up, maybe you have to look up, like, Leonard Bernstein talks about Tchaikovsky and Beethoven or something. He's sitting at the piano, and it's, like, old Leonard Bernstein with his, like, cigarette and like wonderful. Playing the piano with his cigarette, and he's explaining how Beethoven, you look at Beethoven's manuscripts and they're all a mess, and they're all everything's scratched out and rewritten a number of times and stuff like that. But that when you listen to Beethoven, like, it's so funny. Lenny talks about how, like, the orchestration is not great. Like I
think I know this video. Now that you say that sounds like something I've heard. The horns are blaring and stuff like that. But he plays, like, the funeral march from the Seventh Symphony, that bum 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 bum, and he sits there and plays that one note. He's like, "How do you like this melody?" He's like, "The melodies aren't great." He's like, all this stuff. But the thing that makes Beethoven phenomenal, and, like, at the absolute height of classical Western music, is that every note that comes after the one that preceded it could not have been anything else but that note. Right.
Like, it's this idea that it's sort of perfectly constructed, and so the result is that it almost seems divinely inspired or whatever.
Sure.
But that kind of thing, I've been thinking about that lately in terms of, like, choosing repertoire, doing arrangements and things, that I'm looking for music that's sort of constructed in such a way that, I don't know, it just seems like it couldn't have really been anything else. It's somehow, it's just right, like that, the way that it is. And I think Bach for sure achieves that, as well as anyone.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, Bach is amazing, and his music is my go-to in terms of probably both technique and ear training. As a player, I think it's my favorite sort of nose to the grindstone. Like, I'm going to work out my ears, and I'm going to work out the connection between my brain and my fingers.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's essentially, we could say that it's like getting around Bach. I mean, getting to a certain point with Bach and really wrestling with Bach, and at least working up a few pieces and diving in the way that you just talked about, is, I would say, something like an actor, really reckoning with Shakespeare, and really having, like, at least a few parts under their belt and a few of the, great monologues or whatever, that there's so much in that, that you can never be exhausted, really. And, like, somebody else, I forget who said this, but somebody has also said that, like, no matter what you do to Bach, like, you could play it, on distorted electric guitar or whatever.
And people, like, do.
Oh yeah. People definitely do. Play it on, electronic synthesizer, do it, whatever. It on glass, whatever they call that, glass harmonica, or and it's still. I've heard some actually. There's a guitarist that I really like, a steel string guy named Tony McManus, who plays Celtic music, is a Scotsman who lives in Canada, or did for a long time, and he has a steel string version of the chaconne. Which is pretty cool. Yeah, so he's playing the chaconne on steel string guitar. Okay. But I mean, really, I like it.
It's really attack heavy.
I mean, it's just a different timbre. Yeah, I mean, maybe, but it's just not like pedal steel, but just just like the acoustic steel string guitar. Although that would be also interesting. I mean, I've been taking a deep dive lately into country music. And
that's right. Yeah, you were posting about it.
Yeah, it's a little bit. So the pedal steel is an interesting instrument too. But anyway, that's a fun.
So let's get into a little bit of your work. So we probably haven't talked in close to 10 years. Yeah, I know. Yeah, I know, because I was brand new at UW, and I feel like you were finishing up. And I remember that you were working on a number of arrangements of Gershwin tunes, which was very cool. And then I remember the Bach that you were playing. But yeah, so what's going on?
Yeah.
How's life? How's music?
Yeah. Thanks. A lot's going on, and life is pretty good, and music is going pretty well. And, I feel like we're going to be having these conversations for a little while, right? About because this conversation is happening in June of 2021. And so, it seems like in the States, we're kind of at a turning point in the pandemic, where we're kind of turning a page. Now, I was having a conversation with someone earlier today where, a friend and colleague of mine who has a position at the university here, and was saying that he's kind of predicting that there may be like an outbreak in the fall, and that there's going to be like these little setbacks, kind of, that we're not kind of completely out of the woods. He wasn't predicting that there would be anything catastrophic, but that, we may have outbreaks. There's these different variants and stuff like this of the virus still that are popping up. And of course, other countries are not maybe quite where we are with the vaccines and all that, and still struggling in a lot of different places. So I think we have to be, I think a lot of people are, I was saying this, like, everybody wants this to be over and done with. And I don't care where you are on the political spectrum or whatever. That's one thing we can agree with. We want this behind us. We want to move forward. Right. Mm-hmm. But that's not exactly how science works, in terms of, just because we want it to be over, it doesn't make it over, So I think, and I include myself in this. I'm anxious to, certainly get back to live performance, and that's starting to happen. I know you're doing some of that now as well. And, but so I'm not sure that we're quite at the point where like we could have the ticker tape parade and like the, the moment in the, the kiss moment with the sailor coming off of World War II. Like, we all want that. But, and we're close to that, but I don't know that we're quite there yet. But I think we're going to be having these conversations for quite some time about, and maybe for the rest of our lives, even, because this has been such a huge event, right?
Right.
But about kind of what was this period like, and especially it's so interesting for musicians, right? Because I think that we are in a very unique situation in that one critical element, or one very important aspect of what we do, is just completely taken away, or almost completely taken away. Live performance, right? And of course that's been hard for musicians, who rely on that for their livelihood, and for whom that's a big part of their passion and all of that. And it's going to come back. It is a matter of time, but of course it's going to come back. But that has been, obviously a big part of this. On the flip side, I would say, and this is not true. Everyone's experience is going to be different. And, you know, that's just what it is. You know, everyone had different kinds of challenges, you know. But I would say that, like, for me, it afforded me an opportunity to dig into some projects that I had not really felt that I had the time for, or whatever. And I think that's the case with a lot of people that I've heard conversations of and spoken with and so forth, is that, like, you know, just having the time to write, to arrange, to work on to record, to do different kinds of things, and, you know, to try to, like, basically kind of work with what we have. You know what I mean? So it's interesting, like, to go back to your question. Yeah, I've done the most arranging in my life that year of my last year of my doctoral degree, where I was doing my doctoral project, and this past year.
That's amazing.
That's have been, I didn't do a ton of it in between, but in terms of arranging, and now I'm hoping that it's going to be something that I really feel like I've got some momentum, and I've kind of really fallen in love with that aspect of making music on the guitar, and you know, making new arrangements, trying to figure out what kinds of things can work, and sort of, you know, just really explore and have fun with it, and you know, and all that sort of thing. So for me, it's been kind of I would say that it's been a mixed bag this pandemic period, and that there's been actually some good on a personal level, in terms of the work, the music that I've been, you know, creating on the guitar.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think last year was probably one of my more productive years I've had in a long time. Maybe for better and for worse. I wrote an orchestral piece. I put out a short album. I started writing articles and things like this. So I think what you're saying is very true for a lot of us. We found the time to do things, and we've also shifted the way we do things. And I've actually I've grown to appreciate teaching over Zoom in an interesting way, because what I've found is that where I used to make up for a lot of my students' technical flaws by playing with them to try and help them feel good about their playing, you can't really do over Zoom. And so it's this very stark situation where students are kind of forced to face the fact that they're making this music all on their own, in their own room or whatever. And so I think that there have been a lot of aspects to the pandemic that have been interesting in showing all of us where we could be pushing a lot harder, and then also, you know, emotionally very difficult for all of us because of the separation, because of social distancing and all of this. So it's this weird mixed bag. It's a very strange situation.
Absolutely. Yeah. You're right on. I think I agree with that so much that it's like, what you just said about it kind of forcing us in a way to, if you're willing to do it, you're kind of forced to, but then you can turn away from, like, you know, do I face the things that I want to work on, that I think I can improve upon, or do I want to kind of turn away from that? And I mean, it's, you know, and I've had moments where I turn away, but I think more often I've come back and kind of worked on, you know. And one thing is we started before we kind of started really rolling here. I've never been just that technical minded, but now, you know, I'm trying to kind of really get to a point where I can do my own videos to a level where I really like the quality of video that and audio. And you know, I feel like each video that I'm doing, I feel like it's kind of a little bit better than the last. And that's actually always my goal. That's always my goal with everything. And when I was teaching, you know, I learned this, maybe from my dad, who was my first teacher, or maybe from one of my other early teachers. I don't remember, but this idea that, like, as a kid, when I practice, if I practice for 20 minutes, I want to have progressed, even if it's like a very tiny amount, once I get up, be a little further along than when I sat down. And so, yeah, I mean, what else can you really expect, right? Right. I mean, that's I think how the people that we would really, really admire also achieve what they achieve. Is like, you're sort of chipping away at the things that need improvement. So yeah, that's been one area that I think with the technical side of things, that I'm still kind of, I think I have learned a fair bit, because I probably would be like nowhere still, and I'm not quite at nowhere. I'm still I have a lot to learn and improve upon with just sound, audio equipment, software, and all those things, which I think so many people, and I admire people who are just very savvy with that. That's, I think, both maybe my natural inclination, just maybe the way my mind works, and also my interest has always been more on just performance, the music itself, the technical aspects of playing, the performance aspect of putting together a concert and all that stuff, but the technical aspects are in a lot of cases are part of, conveying what you have to convey artistically. So I recognize that it's very important. Sometimes in the past I've outsourced it. I've gone to a studio and, and that's one way to do it. But of course there are a lot of benefits to being able to do it on your own.
Oh yeah. There's so many topics this brings up. What I think about a lot of things about outsourcing work, about academia's relationship to entertainment, and where music and performance fits in that space, and then also about the issue of sort of jack of all trades, master of none, which I think is a real danger, or can be a danger, about having too many hats. And so focusing very intently on your performance, on your musicianship, obviously makes it very hard to then be a master of recording equipment, lighting, staging, dramaturgy, the entire thing. And so outsourcing it does make sense, and having a team to work with. But then also there seems to be a little bit of a tension between the focus on your work as an entertainment versus your work as artistic output, maybe.
Very interesting. Yeah. And I think a lot about all these things, but I tell you what, the first thing that kind of comes to mind hearing you say that is that entertainment, I think, should not be a dirty word in the world of academia, and academia should not be a bad word in the world of entertainment. Like, why are these things at odds? They are often at odds. You're right, but I don't think they should be.
Right.
And so, that's something really interesting to kind of think about. I've actually been out of academia for a number of years now. So, and I haven't even, very recently I started teaching a few lessons to my cousin, who is actually a very accomplished musician in his own right. He's a vocalist and does trumpet and has studied formally, in fact, in graduate school and all that. But was interested in classical guitar, and it was an opportunity for me to, teach him a little bit. And it was really, really fun to do that. And it made me think that, and I've long thought that I expect that while I've taken a break from teaching over the last few years, that I may well do some more teaching at some point in the not too distant future in some capacity, maybe just taking on a small number of students, maybe just in a private studio or something like that. But Yeah, it's really interesting. I feel that I'm actually really a lot more free having been out of academia, but I also have a lot. I mean, of course, like I'm largely a product of academia because I spent so much time in that world pursuing degrees and then teaching for a number of years as well. So there's a lot of good there for sure, but I think there's also a lot of things that need to be, in my view, really reformed. But that's a whole nother conversation. And I feel like that's not really my battle to fight. Now, somebody needs to fight it. So maybe that's me. That's not,
that's okay.
I don't, yeah, I feel like I'm pursuing other battles to fight. And that maybe somehow, even just by being, like I said, a product of academia who's now kind of in this domain where I'm doing music that is like rooted in solid academic classical training, but is now kind of branching out into other domains. I kind of hope that in some small way that could demonstrate that like this is one way to go, that like there's so many different avenues. I mean, music is really infinite to me. And, I've been thinking about this idea that, I don't know if, so for the non-University of Wisconsin audience that'll hear this, one of the great faculty members at the University of Wisconsin Music School is Susan Cook, who's a musicologist, and she has been the director actually for the last several years. I took a course with her, I believe it was Music After 1945, and in that course she talked about what she actually divided the course up into these different kind of sections, like a few weeks on this particular area, and she called them musical constellations.
Oh, nice.
And I thought that was
fun.
So interesting. Like, what a cool way to think about it. That like jazz is a constellation unto itself, and that they sometimes they kind of jut up against another constellation, but it's a whole deep world into itself.
Wow. Okay.
And the last few years where I've spent some time kind of dipping my toe into the world of flamenco, dipping my toe into the world of country music, before that, dipping my toe into the world of jazz, while always being a classical guitarist.
Right.
And never really trying to be a musician in that, like, I'm not like a jazz musician, but I can play a little bit of jazz. I dabble in, and I love it, and I can learn from it, and there's aspects of it that I try to bring into my arrangements, and even like when I program, I sort of think about things. I just think in a way that's maybe informed by some of these other genres. So I don't know if I'm not sure that answers what your question
it's okay.
was.
I mean, it brings up a lot of other thoughts. The constellation thing is interesting, and the comment that you just made about being a classical guitar player, but being interested in country and flamenco and jazz, which, of course, as a guitar player, these are all extremely important traditions. I have a similar I have a similar relationship. I feel like I cannot in good conscience call myself a classical guitar player anymore, but I think I've been playing in sort of the pit orchestra world and sort of like the professional performing world for a long time, which is interesting because it's definitely a jack of all trades, master of none problem, because I think I've become a bad rock player, a bad jazz player, a bad reggae player, blah, 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 blah. But I can kind of do, I can sort of make things sound like all of those different traditions. So to you, what does it mean to be a classical guitar player? And then what information are you getting from these other traditions? I feel like flamenco to me is the easiest connection, and then maybe jazz and country I'm very interested in. Because country guitar playing blows my mind. It's amazing, and I'm kind of disconnected from it.
Well, I'm only at the very beginning of my exploration, really, of country. So I'll come back to that. But it makes me think. Actually, this is very, very lofty, and I don't expect to achieve this in my lifetime. But I think it was Pablo Casals who said that his aspiration was to be a human being, a musician, and then a cellist, in that order.
Good. Yeah. I love
which also is my aspiration, to be a human being, a musician, and then a classical guitarist.
Right.
Or a guitarist and then a classical guitarist, maybe. It would even divide it up like that.
It's interesting which you put first.
Well, yeah, because I think that I view classical guitar as my roots, like like in the way that almost like it's almost in a way, this is not a perfect comparison or whatever, but it's almost in a way like my nationality or something.
Okay.
Or it's like an aspect of my identity that is undeniable, but it is never going to go away, even if I become, even if I go live somewhere else outside of this country or whatever, I'll still be like an American living in wherever. But that's only, again, one aspect of who I am. Right. So, but it is a core aspect. So I think I think classical guitar, because I began playing classical guitar from a very young age. And I started with classical guitar because of my father, who was a serious amateur and started teaching me when I was very, very young. So I think
that's unusual.
It is unusual. Yeah. Most classical guitarists over the last several decades, begin with some other style of guitar, and then they come into classical guitar. So for me, it's very, and I was very fortunate that he took me to see John Williams, the guitarist, Julian Bream, the Romeros, at age 6, 7, 8, I was going to these concerts. Yeah. And I get to even go backstage and meet them and say hello to them and this sort of thing. And went to master classes by about age of, I think, 10 with Pepe for the first time, or 8, maybe even 8. So I was very, very fortunate to have this. So it's very, very I feel like in terms of my musical DNA, it's very, very deep. It runs, and I was listening to, it was like he was playing Segovia records and all that stuff, in the house, a lot. So it was very, so for me, it's
That's
just a
wild.
very important part.
That's cool, man.
It's a very important part of me, of who I am.
Most classical guitar players I know started off playing Green Day and Black Sabbath and stuff. That's very cool. I love it. It's so embedded.
Yeah, it is interesting. And then I had this distinct memory though of a few. There's a few interesting things that happened to me as a kid. One was that my uncle, when I was maybe in the 5th grade or something like that, I think, gave me. I have to remember, I'm kind of an old guy. I grew up in the 90s, and I actually remember at a certain point going with my dad to buy a CD player, because up to that point, CDs were not actually the main thing, like in the late 80s into the, it only was, it was cassette tapes, absolutely. And it was records, but cassette tapes were actually the main thing at that point. So I remember my uncle for Christmas gave me this cassette player, a boombox. And it was the coolest thing. It was a bright red. It was designed to look like a 1957 Chevy. It's this old, a car. It was a cool, and for a kid in the 5th grade, this was the coolest. And he gave me a cassette of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band with that thing, and I wore that out, completely, and that was so mind blowing to hear that album.
Okay, so there's
that,
rock and roll for you. There's guitar player right in there. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, a whole different style. And then, my dad had some of that stuff around too. And later I kind of became more and more aware. And there were, of course, other moments along the way. And then I remember listening to Kind of Blue when I was like senior year of high school. And that also being, I actually spent time, I had a medical issue and spent some time in the hospital. And I remember listening to Kind of Blue in the hospital and it feeling like a healing, like hearing that music, just being so sort of luminous. It sounded like, when like Miles comes in on some of the tunes and then Coltrane is playing and all the stuff that's going on in that record and how sort of moody it is and sort of how just evocative. And it just felt like a balm to hear that in music. And it was very, very interesting. So there are a few like moments, there's a whole host of other moments, but those kind of musical moments for me. And I'm sure like a lot of people have these kinds of experiences with music where and it might be something like, something related to, a young relationship and listening to this record to get them through that or whatever, that's very common. And I've had some of that sort of thing as well. But, so I think that's really interesting, but I think for musicians, it takes on there's another aspect to it for those of us who are, when we come across certain, recordings or performances or artists that we discover, in our young years, especially, but it happens later too. I mean, actually, like I said, I've only recently taken a kind of a deep dive into country music. Right. So, it's been great. I think I always want to kind of try to retain actually as much of that youthful excitement that I had when I was in the 5th grade listening to Sgt. Pepper's. I actually feel like I do, like, now I'm listening to like Bob Wills's Texas Playboys from like the 1940s.
Amazing.
And listening, and I'm like as excited about hearing that and hearing Hank Williams and all this stuff as I was, hearing the Beatles, when I was in grade school. So it's pretty interesting how just again, to go back to all the discovering these constellations and how it's just so deep and there's so many portals into the wide world of music and then into these different constellations again, if you will.
Oh yeah. Well, with classical guitar specifically, and this is not meant to be an attack or an offense to classical guitar.
Bring it on.
No, it's good. I see it as a tradition that sort of brings other sort of vernacular traditions into it. And I remember thinking about this when you were doing the Gershwin arrangements at UW, because I think that was also part of Gershwin's practice in a lot of ways. But I think it's something intrinsic to a lot of classical guitar writing, referencing flamenco and Spanish music, and then samba music and bossa nova in Brazil. And I'm interested in this with country music, and I think that's happening more. Country and blues and rock and roll, which are so intrinsic to the world of guitar, but also like very divorced from classical guitar in a way. How classical guitar can take on these musics and keep them powerful, not sort of neuter them. Keep them powerful, but also maintain the technique and the beautiful artifice of classical guitar.
Yeah, very well said. It reminds me of something that John Williams, the guitarist, said, I believe in the film The Seville Concert, which was a really cool kind of documentary film that Williams did sometime in the late 90s, I think. And he says in there something like the guitar has no great classical Western classical repertoire to speak of on one hand. And on the other hand, it has a repertoire that is infinite and and because it does have exactly what you're talking about, because the guitar, beyond the classical guitar, because the guitar has become a folk instrument and a popular instrument in so many different parts of the world, so many different musical traditions, that the classical guitar can also, sort of bring that into the fold of its repertoire. Mm-hmm. And exactly what you're talking about. It's really exciting and interesting how that has been the case and continues to be, I think. But I also think that actually this idea of bringing like popular music or folk, the vernacular music, is something that has existed forever in most traditions, including, in West, Mozart and Haydn are using like songs that are essentially like drinking songs or hymns or whatever they were, and then, doing incredible things with those tunes and stuff like that was some of what they were doing, or things that were influenced by, again, tavern songs, religious songs, all kinds of things like that beyond just concert music. So it's been a part of, I think, also the bigger world of classical music for a long time. But I also think you're right that the guitar does have a particular way of doing that's pretty special.
Right. Well, there's a video, and I don't remember what it's from, but I think it's Segovia describing the guitar as an orchestra in and of itself. And he talks about the different registers and the basses and the winds in the middle and the strings soaring up on top and things like that. And thinking about the classical guitar as a full ensemble in and of itself, which to me is the big distinction between classical guitar and a lot of other types of guitar. And it isn't complete, because solo jazz guitar is that also. And if you listen to Brazilian samba players, if they're playing solo, they're doing that also. And even blues guitar players and Mark Knopfler, the way he plays, he's being a full ensemble. And that ability to do that on the guitar is crazy, because it's not like the piano, but it is like the piano. I often think of the guitar as 6 keyboards that are kind of offset at an angle like that.
Absolutely. One thing I would make a distinction, however, between, I agree with that. That's really great. I just would make a distinction actually with one thing, which is I think important, which is I think that the classical guitar is unique in that you can get a wider range of timbres with nylon string, a classical guitar. I think with a sort of well-developed classical training and technique, you can get so many different kinds of colors and timbres that are, I think, reflective of the symphonic orchestra in a micro sense. You know what I mean? Whereas I think those other styles are emulating more like the ensembles of the traditions from which they come, which also have a timbral range and all that, but it may not be quite the same kind of timbral range as the symphonic orchestra has. Right. So that would be the one thing that I would say that's a bit of a distinction, but it's not to take anything away from those other styles. But I just think that the symphonic orchestra is such a is like, again, to go back to something, I can't remember the composer. You might know that there was some composer from the 20th century who talked about the terrible power of the symphonic orchestra.
Okay. I don't know, but that's a good...
That phrase really stuck with me, though, because, of course, you listen to, even Beethoven for sure, but you listen to Bruckner or Mahler, and you definitely hear that terrible power. But, go ahead, yeah.
I don't know about that with classical guitar, though. I don't think I would say terrible power with classical guitar.
No, you're right, except there's one player who you hear it in, and that's Kazuhito Yamashita, if you've ever heard his playing. And he's done unbelievable things, especially when he was young. Like, he plays the entire Dvorak's Ninth Symphony on solo guitar, and he plays the Firebird Suite by Stravinsky on solo guitar.
On nylon strings?
Yeah.
Wow.
And when you hear that, you do hear the terrible power.
Okay.
in one man playing an instrument. But he's sort of like doing something that's sort of mysterious, I think, on some level.
Okay.
because it's pretty. Yeah, so you could track down, I think, some of those recordings still. Kazuhito Yamashita.
Okay.
But anyway, no, you're right. On that aspect, not to that extent of like those, especially the late Romantic orchestra, but in terms of more the sense of the timbral,
right.
Differences and contrasts of the different colors, and there's that. Maybe that's the video. I know there's the film that Segovia did where he actually says like this is the sound of the cello. This is the sound of the trumpets.
Yep.
And that's exactly what I'm talking about. So I don't think that those other styles of guitar quite do have that timbral,
right?
Those timbral differences, but they still have. They might have things though that are not happening with classical guitar. Like particularly, you think about a player like Chet Atkins, where he's got the thumb going with the thumb pick and that thumping bass kind of thing that happens in country western music. So there's that, or all those other styles where they're kind of emulating, or like like Tommy Emmanuel, who's kind of in some ways a successor to Chet,
right.
has like taken that and kind of added like the rock and roll element where it's like very kind of all out. You know what I mean? Yeah, there's a power there for sure too. So.
It's interesting. I have this weird relationship with classical guitar for this reason, because it's so delicate, and I relate it to harp because my wife is a harpist, and I feel like both instruments sort of excel at being pretty, but the power is honestly quite difficult in terms of, like, if you go see AC/DC, you have 10,000 people losing their minds. That is hard to do with a classical guitar.
Well, it's going, yeah, but yes, of course, but that's like comparing, Rembrandt to Picasso. They're not trying to achieve the same thing.
Of course.
So
right. The power is different. It's seeking something different.
Yeah, I mean, but again, there's power in the classical guitar for sure. I mean, and not just with the Yamashita. I mean, Pepe Romero is another brilliant example of an extremely powerful player. And I recently did an arrangement of a piece by Joaquin Torina, who wrote a bunch of music for the guitar for Segovia, but he also was a prolific composer who wrote a lot of piano music and a lot of other things. And I arranged a couple of his piano pieces, and one in particular, it's called Sacramente. It's from his Cinco Danzas Gitanas, and that is a piece kind of like a little bit, maybe almost like Leyenda is a very famous example by Albéniz. That's in some ways emulating at least aspects, or at least the spirit of flamenco and that power that is in flamenco. And so there's a lot of the rasguados and this kind of thing where there is definitely a power, and I'm really trying to get that across when I'm playing a piece like that. Like, it's definitely very different from what I'm trying to do when I play, a piece like Recuerdos or something that's very lyrical.
Yes.
So there is definitely like a range, but it's just a medium that has like a different kind of, I guess you would say, like tonal, I don't know, range. Sure. But I don't mean tonal in the sense of like harmonically, but I mean, you know what I mean? Just
yes, I do. Yeah, right.
Yeah,
I think everybody gets you.
Okay.
Yeah.
So okay, I have a question for you because kind of going back a couple of things. So about the pandemic time and kind of how do you think that has, because I've been reflecting on this, like I said, I think we're going to be having these conversations a lot for a long time about how do you think that can you speak more to how you think it's impacted like the kinds of projects you've done? And like, for example, I actually wanted to ask you, so I've seen some of your podcast for a little while, but is that something that you started before the pandemic, or was it started during the pandemic?
Yeah, it's something I've been doing for a while. What I like about podcasts is I like the process of thinking out loud, and it strikes it. I feel like it's the foil to writing an article, where you edit it and you come up with the perfect version of your argument or something like that. And what I like about a podcast is it's long form. There's no time limit. There's no ads. I mean, there could be, but not,
Sure.
those aren't intrinsic to the medium. And so you can pose questions and you can think out loud and you can hear people's thought process. And that human connection is what I like about a podcast, which is interesting because it's a digital medium and people are listening while driving or something like that. Yeah. But it's hearing people's thought process, which is something that I'm thinking about a lot with respect to academia, about where the quote I, like me, exists in academia, because a lot of academic writing is posed objectively as if something is true. Here's the evidence for why it's true. But at the same time, most of those things are still opinions. And so there's an honesty to saying, I think this is true. And that's
absolutely
that's what's powerful about a podcast to me. And so this is why I've been pushing on this, and even pre-pandemic, pushing in this direction.
Okay. I'd like to follow up with that, but just to and I don't have to keep asking questions because I know I'm supposed to.
It's okay. No, whatever. It's free form, man. That's it. We're thinking out loud.
Right. Absolutely. No, absolutely. You're right. I mean, that's what the podcast is. It's basically listening in on a conversation.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And there's, I think, obviously been a lot of interest in that because, podcast is a very popular format.
Right.
And I mean, I listen to a whole bunch of different ones and it is exactly that. You're listening in on people's thoughts and you're listening in on conversation.
Mm-hmm.
So do you think though that things have, besides, I know you spoke about the teaching, how that aspect, are there other aspects of it that have, for you been that changed in any way, the way that you're, or even just particular projects that you actually say, like, I can't do this, or I don't want to do this, but I'm going to redirect here, or I'm going to continue this, but I'm going to tweak it based on something that's happened. So some elements that are, been part of the way things have been as a result of this.
I mean, I think the decentralization of performance is something that's big. And I think, unfortunately, I actually don't like this, but I think that live performance is becoming more peripheral to people's experience. And so the digital medium, like we're all becoming cyborgs kind of a thing. We're all becoming more and more attached to our electronic devices, our phones, our computers, our tablets, things like that. And so I think having a presence in the digital space is becoming more important. Obviously, I mean, we all feel this. We've felt this for years. So the podcast and the pandemic they kind of go hand in hand. They're sort of helping each other, specifically Zoom. I mean, there's a nice little framing for anybody watching on YouTube. It looks great. You're over here. I'm over here. I can put my logo in the corner. It's wonderful. But at the same time, I used to only do podcasts in person, and that was kind of a rule I had because I wanted to have that face-to-face.
Yeah.
And so the pandemic it's once again, it's kind of like a double-edged sword. Zoom is a neat little program that frames everything nicely, but at the same time, I'm not having in-person conversations.
Yeah. Very interesting. Yeah, and that makes sense. It's right. Yeah. So I'm hearing what you're saying, and I would agree with this, that there are kind of a pros and cons, and there's aspects of it that are. Now, I don't quite. I mean, obviously, during the pandemic, the live performance has become peripheral. Mm-hmm. I actually, I mean, who knows what's going to happen, right? But I see actually maybe we're going to have a period of a kind of renaissance of live performance.
I hope so.
And it being actually, because I think people are really going to crave it, and especially once they experience it, I think if they have a good experience, that they will actually crave it even more, because I've been thinking about this a lot, because live performance is my favorite thing about music making, period, full stop.
Yep.
And that's maybe true for a lot of people, but certainly not for everyone. But as a performer, like, I mean, recording is very sort of, it can feel at times very tedious and very, the process is for me, feels very sort of laborious and just very, and I mean, it's rewarding and I enjoy it in many ways, but at the same time, I'm definitely a perfectionist, as a lot of us become after doing this for so long, and so, I mean, I can take many, many days to get a take on a very short piece that I'm pleased with, enough to put out or whatever. But here's what I like about live performance, and maybe Pepe Romero, because he kind of gets into kind of a lot of the kind of spiritual and almost mystical aspects of music making, talks about, I think, like the ephemeral nature of live performance. And I think about that a lot, about how the notes kind of disappear into the air. And but there's something like beautiful about that, right? And there's something about this moment, the way that this is happening right now will never happen again. Like, and when I think about the most memorable moments of my life and the best moments of my life, it's not, even though I have good memories of listening to recordings and watching movies and things like that, it's almost always, it's some kind of an experience with at least one other person. It may just be a one-on-one personal moment, or it may be a shared moment of a group of friends or a performance with an audience, but it's like, and it's because I think partly it's because maybe all of the people there, whether it's you and one other person, or whether it's you and a group of people in a performance or in a group of friends or whatever, it is that those people all feel really present in this moment.
Right.
And there's something about that is just, to me, like beyond any experience of like, as interesting and as good as some of these experiences can be. And I'm not saying that, we shouldn't have the technology or whatever. I'm, as technologically behind as I often feel, I'm certainly not a Luddite or anything like that. I mean, I believe in exactly like when you talked about like having the importance of having a presence. I think that's one thing that the pandemic helped me understand more. I really started my YouTube channel during the pandemic. And I've been wanting to do it for a long time. I never had Instagram. Not that I think that social media is that great, but it's another tool, right? It's another way of discovering things and discovering people and of sharing your stuff. So I just kind of view it like that. And certainly for me, YouTube has been actually like a really fun thing to play with, because it's meant that I can put out videos of my arrangements, which has basically been my channel and been my project. And it's something that I just hope to now continue, and it's allowed me to kind of carve out my own niche, if you will, and basically do what I think it is that you're doing, which I see what you're doing with your duo now with the banjo and bass. Are very cool. And it's like, it strikes me, you can speak for yourself, but it strikes me that because that seems like such a kind of unique project, it seems like you're just making the music that you want to make there.
Yep.
And that's what I'm doing. And so, on my channel with my arrangements, and I'm actually fortunate enough to be able to publish my arrangements too now through Music Notes.
Great.
But I,
so people can buy them, right?
People can buy them. So
find them. I'll put the links below. Yeah. Everybody get Miles's arrangements.
Absolutely. Play 'em. For sure. So, but I've done Beethoven. I've done Billie Eilish. I've done Rosalia, the Spanish pop/flamenco singer. I've done Willie Nelson. I've done Ola Yellow, who is a Norwegian composer based in New York City. I've done film music. So I've done this kind of, and done Joaquin Turina. So I'm doing stuff that's sort of weird in a way to do like in some ways to do like music that's kind of all over the map, and or again, to go back to this idea that sort of it's sort of borrowing from the different constellations, but that's what I'm passionate about. That's what I'm interested in. And, little by little, I'm starting to build a small audience for it. Right. The people are, and maybe some people who really like the Billie Eilish song are like, what is this classical stuff? And maybe some people who are like the classical stuff are rolling their eyes at the pop arrangements or whatever. But I think that's actually not the majority. I think the majority, because I think when the musician or the artist believes in what they're doing, mm-hmm. and what you'll at least and is doing it and has really given their time and attention and devotion to it, that the audience, they can tell.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I mean, when Takamitsu does an arrangement of Yesterday by the Beatles, or he writes some complex classical guitar piece, both of those things are legitimate art, and it's because he loves both of those things.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the key. Pat Metheny said, mm-hmm. Jazz guitarist Pat Metheny said, "I make music to please my inner fan."
Yeah, that's good.
I think that's great. I mean, that's the way I think about it too. Is mm-hmm. I think that's the advantage for me. I mean, within academia, I was doing Gershwin, I was doing Aaron Copland. I was able mm-hmm. to do the things that I really wanted to do. But I do feel more free now being out of academia. Now, maybe that's just a figment of my imagination to some extent, because perhaps had I continued in academia mm-hmm. and had I maybe I would have been able to carve out my own, like, this is what I do and whatever. Right. And, but I don't know. I feel like, I can just do what I want to do now. And I don't, and I'm going to have, like I said, like I've also been thinking, I wanted to ask you another question mm-hmm. about like your audience. And if you think about mm-hmm. your audience, both for the podcast or for the music that you make, and if you think about and who they are, like, I think I started thinking about that and wondering about that a little bit, because it's harder to tell with the digital thing, especially with a YouTube channel, because you mm-hmm. don't always see who your subscribers are, or even if you do see them, sometimes they don't have much of a like a page of their own, or they don't have their own videos. It's just like their email account or something. So you see like a username, but you don't know, like, well, I have no idea, like, what demographic does this person fit into? Like, is this a classical music aficionado? Is this a guitar player? Is this a mm-hmm. casual music listener? My sense is that I've got a little bit of all of that as my audience, because of the diverse kind of stuff that I'm putting out. It's like, on certain things are attracting. The Tarina is going to attract classical guitar aficionados. The Billie Eilish is going to attract different people. The Willie Nelson song is going to attract a different audience. All that stuff, the Beethoven and so on. So I don't know, but I mean, have you thought about that? Like, who your audience, like, who is your audience for the podcast? Are they musicians only?
Mm-hmm. Right.
But they're different kinds of musicians, because you've interviewed many different types of musicians. Yes. So wide. It's quite a wide spectrum.
Yeah, it's a little bit tough, and it's something I think about in terms of making my own music and my own content and all those different areas. And it's tough because, like, when I was at UW-Madison, Laura Schwenniger, one of the composition professors, because I was a composition major, was saying, I hope you never think about your audience. I hope you just make your art as you want to make it. And I very much understand that. And like when we were talking about Kind of Blue, I think that, John Coltrane and Miles Davis are doing what they do. And that's part of what allows people to connect with them, because they're not saying, oh, I hope you like this, please like this. What they're saying is, this is what's powerful and important to me, and that is one of the most powerful things you can do as an artist, is display to the world what's powerful to you. And to go back on something you said before, if a situation or an event is powerful to you and at least one other person, that's the connection. And so I think it's about human connection, but I don't think it's 100%. About chasing people around trying to say, oh, I hope you like this. Please like this. Please like this.
No. Right.
It's about saying this is important to me, and then connecting with other people who that's also important to. So like, if you do a Billie Eilish arrangement, there's people who will both like classical guitar and Billie Eilish and be like, "Oh, this is amazing! I love this."
Sure.
And then you're going to be like, "I love it too." High five.
Right. Absolutely. I will. I agree with you. Although I would add a slight maybe qualification, which is this, that I remember years ago when I was an undergraduate, in Florida, a professor there quoting Milton Babbitt. You know,
don't care if you listen, right?
Yeah, and that he said, "I don't make music for."
Right.
He said, "I make music for my colleagues. I don't. That's what I make music for."
Right.
And the particular professor's, his opinion of that was like, "Well, you've kind of lost. Like that's something that doesn't seem like it's kind of consistent with maybe the tradition of art, actually, in many ways. Like and Babbitt was a mathematician, right? So it's more, I think it was more of that mathematician mind and the academic, but not even beyond academic music, more like mathematician academia.
Right. I mean, Babbitt believed he was on sort of the vanguard of musical experimentation and research, and like that what he was doing was closer to theoretical physics than like Motown. Right.
And I think there's a place for that. I think there's certainly a place for experimentation, and there's certainly a place for all of that. I think for me though, I also want to make music that I think most people would probably like, whether or not they know anything about classical guitar, classical music, or any of the music that I'm playing, really. But it's not chasing people around. You're right. And it's not maybe what some of the more like far end of like the commercial side of pop is like.
I mean, you're a classical guitar player.
Right.
You have your line in the sand. You're right there. You're doing your art.
Although, yes, but I will also say this. I remember Paco de Lucia, saying that, the instrument is just a vehicle for expression.
Yeah.
And I definitely think about that too, as terms of classical guitar. It's a little bit like if I'm a poet in the English language, like, okay, I'm a poet and I'm writing poetry in English. But I mean, how many different kinds of poets are there? E.E. Cummings is not like Shakespeare.
Right.
And so, yes, that's the vehicle of expression for me, classical guitar. But I also don't want it to be, I just think of it as my roots. But I don't, but I think for some people it can become like these kind of labels can become a limitation. And that's why like, doing the different genres and the different arrangements and different styles. And even when I play other people's music too, when I program a concert, I mean, I definitely think about like, I'm always trying to actually do a diverse program because mostly it does start with what you said. It first is, do I like it? Right. Do I really enjoy digging into this music? But also, do I enjoy, I guess here's the connection. It's, do I enjoy playing it for people? And I think that is an aspect of it. I'm not just playing for myself.
Right.
I think that's important. Like, it's like, and nothing that's okay to do that sometime, as just maybe a practice for yourself. But as in terms of being a musician who's out here trying to make my little contribution, I mean, I want to make music that I think people are going to like. So
yeah,
it's not like I don't, I think again, even with Miles, where he was like turning his back to the audience, in my opinion, like I don't know, because like Louis Armstrong was a showman,
right?
But he's every bit at least the artist that Miles was. There wasn't anything, there wasn't less of an artist because he was also like a showman.
Right.
So that goes again, maybe back to the entertainment aspect. And I mean, I'll tell you this, when I think about programming a concert, I think of myself actually as like the curator of a museum. And I think maybe I got this idea from actually Mussorgsky's Pictures in an Exhibition, the piece where it's like every movement is like a picture. And then he also has the promenade movements where you walk from painting to painting, you know. But I think about that when I program, and it's almost like when I go to a museum, I want to kind of lose myself in a painting for a moment. Right. And just like when I watch a film or an episode of a show, like I'm entering into that world for 2 hours or for half an hour or whatever it is. And so when I perform, especially live, but it applies to creating digital content as well, I'm trying to create worlds that people can enter into. You know, that's basically my goal. And it's an offering, right? What we're doing is an offering. I love that. I actually I forget who it was, but there's the musical offering, right? It's Bach, isn't it?
Right.
Or,
yeah.
What a beautiful phrase, a musical offering. That's, I think, what we're always doing is actually, to me, that's what I want to be doing. Is that like I'm creating something that I really like, and then I'm offering it up.
Right.
And, you know, take it or leave it, but hopefully take it.
Right. Of course. Yeah. Right. You care a little bit if they listen.
Yeah, I do. Yeah. I'd like you to listen. I'd say it like that.
Exactly.
I'd like you to listen.
Yeah. That's great. Yeah, I think that's powerful. I think that's good.
Another question for you, and then if there's any other questions you maybe have, and then we can play.
Yeah.
So you're in LA area, right?
Yep.
And how long have you been there?
Since 2014, so a while now.
Okay, so been there for a while. And when you went out there, did you go out to do a degree, to go to school, to teach? What? Okay.
Yeah, I came out here for a master's in integrated composition, improvisation, and technology.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a mouthful. That sounds pretty interesting. And then, so after that time in school, you decided to stay, or you have stayed.
Yes. Yeah.
And what has being in such a huge city and being an independent musician and having kind of like a variety, you're doing some teaching, you're doing musical theater stuff, you've got your own independent projects, you've got the podcast. So you've got what a lot of us do, which is you have multiple things going at once. But what has that experience been like for you in such a place where it seems like sometimes maybe people can get lost in such a big, and maybe people sometimes think they're going to somewhere to try to break in, maybe to film score stuff or whatever it is, or any number of, or, you know, the pop world or whatever, that's so competitive. But it seems like maybe you're doing some of that too, I don't know, but it seems like you've got kind of several of your own things that you're doing, and you're sort of carving out your own niche in a way. But I don't know, what is your sense of all of that?
I mean, I think there's a little bit of a myth of, quote, like making it or something like that. I think that what happens with most people is you find yourself working in an area, and then you kind of build up in that area, or you find, like what you're saying, you find a niche or something like that. So I've really enjoyed playing in sort of the musical theater circuit around the LA area. And that's good. I feel like I'm probably the best guitarist I've ever been. Like, my reading is really good. Like, programming in terms of pedals and sounds and all that stuff. Like, I think my technique my level is much, much higher than it's ever been, or it was pre-pandemic. And I'm trying to keep it up through my own projects. But, I mean, it's tough. I think there's all these weird ideas about music. Like, you don't have to quote make it. You don't have to be a rock star. You can have a career just being a musician. And there's money, there's work, there's plenty of stuff to go around. And so this, like, You know, your parents are worried because there's only one Michael Jackson. It's true, there's only one Michael Jackson, but there's thousands and thousands of musicians who play with Michael Jackson and who play on the musical that they make out of Michael Jackson's music. And there's all this work, and it's this whole decentralized thing. And so I think that's a big thing that people who are getting into music can learn, is that you don't have to shoot for the top. It's nice to shoot for the top, but there's tons of work in all these different areas. And you can work in arranging and composing and performing. And if you like tech, you can work in audio engineering. It's completely decentralized.
That's great. And what a kind of, I think, healthy way to think about it. And you can do whatever it is you do, I think, at a very high level.
Yes.
I mean, you know, and I think you're doing that, but it's like so it's not like it's just because you're not famous or you're not maybe making millions or something that you're not successful. I think you're right. There's so much mystique around music, you know, around the world of music. And that exists in, I think, every different genre, actually. It could exist in classical music, too. You know, the mystique of the competition winners or the you know, the performer who's, you know, the soloist, you know, touring, playing concerti with orchestras. Yeah, that's great part of it. And that's the most glamorous, maybe. But then again, a lot of their life is not glamorous because, you know, a lot of it's just, you know, spending time in hotel rooms between gigs and stuff like that. So, you know, not, you know, so there's a lot to it. Yeah. And I think that's really good and really interesting. So part of why I'm asking is because I'm about to move. I've been living in Wisconsin for about a decade, a little more than, and I'm about to move to Nashville, which of course is a hub of music and a hub of country music. And I'm not going to do country music. Right. But of course, I always kind of think when in Rome, at least do a little bit of what the Romans do. But I will continue to actually do the current day job that I have, which is working for Music Notes, this company that does digital sheet music and do editing with them. And that's been cool. a really nice job in many, many ways. And has afforded me opportunity to do things, other things kind of on the side, mostly performing and creating my own content now and all of that. So, but it's just interesting, I think, as I was kind of, as we reconnected and everything, to look at where you're at and what you're doing. I think there's maybe some actually parallels between going to such a big place that's such a hub of music, and there's so much musical culture and musical life there. And yet, and there are tons of people, as you know, who go out there to be in the movies or to do film music or to do rock or pop and try to, you know, become the next big thing. And they go to Nashville to become the next country star or whatever. But that's not why you went out there, is what I'm hearing you say. And that's not why I'm going down there. But it is actually one reason to be in these places is to participate in that other kind of that infrastructure, the culture, the scene, and also the kind of the infrastructure of the, for lack of a better term, industry. I mean, you know, we're not primarily maybe in the commercial music world. So although, you know, in some regards I am with Music Notes, but it's a different thing. So it's really interesting to think about. And I think it's something that I don't hear talked about very much. Right. You know, very rarely do I hear conversations about. It's a lot of like, basically, I don't know. You either, become kind of this top tier performer or you teach. Those are like the options that people talk about the most. Right. But the idea of thinking outside the box, and for me, that's been so beneficial. And I feel very, very fortunate to have the job that I have. But I would say that it was partly the result. It was the result of a few things. It was the result of having the right skills, the timing being right, and having a bit of a stroke of just good luck in regards to the timing and all that. But also thinking outside the box and looking and kind of starting and like thinking about like, because I'd been in this world of like, this is what you do. You basically, if you're a classical guitarist, you know, mostly you you become a classical guitar teacher,
Right.
and whether it be in whether you have your own studio and you perform as well. And they're very, you almost can count them on one hand, or certainly two, the people that maybe make their entire income off of performing classical guitar.
Very
and
rare.
Like and this is extraordinarily rare. But the idea that there are other ways, and that there, and I feel that academia ought to do a better job of helping students to kind of consider, the variety of different career paths that are out there. There was this term, I'm blanking kind of on the term because I've been out of this world for so long, but there was a term that I remember seeing in the world of academia, something like alternative something, basically for like PhDs and people who had terminal degrees. This idea that, there's this, that you can go into other areas as a job that are beyond simply academia, whether it be, and this is not even only in music, this is maybe in other fields as well, where, and I have colleagues or friends who are, in other fields outside of music who have PhDs who are either have maybe a job in academia, but it's not a teaching position. It's more like an administrative, or a coordination. And it may have a teaching aspect, but it's not primarily teaching. Or certainly also, like I have a friend who has basically a job in the private sector, as a PhD doing some, like at a think tank. This is a person that has a degree, advanced degree in education, who is working for a think tank. So, but that's not probably like the most talked about, considered. And I don't know that she was thinking about that particularly. You know what I mean? So it's interesting just to think about, the different things that are out there. I just always try to be, I want to continue in every aspect of life, really, but to just try to see as much of what's going on as possible. Like to try to get the panoramic view, to not get it's so easy to get the more narrow view, and we all do it, I think. And and not even on purpose. It's just, sometimes you have to work to see what's going on over there, because I'm just looking, because there's so much happening here, that you can just get sucked into that, but that's not all that's happening. If that makes sense.
No, it's true. I mean, even like a Michael Jackson concert, you might not even see the other musicians on stage, and that's just the immediate dispersion. And then off stage, then you have all these sound people. And then next door, there's a whole other concert going on with completely different people. And it's this completely dispersed situation. But you only focus on, oh my gosh, there's Michael Jackson right there.
Yeah, it's the rest of the iceberg under the water, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
I think it's a great point. I think, that's good.
Interesting.
Cool. Well, do you want to play something? See what happens. We've been talking. We've been going back and forth. That'd
be fun.
Let's see what happens with music.
Absolutely. So because I'm a classical guitarist, I'll play classical guitar, but I'm not the multi-instrumentalist that you are. So I would say, if you want to play guitar, that's fine, but you can also feel free to grab another instrument, a banjo or steel string acoustic. It'd be fun.
Maybe I'll go grab my banjo. That would be fun.
That'd be fun. Cool.
Sweet. Let's see what happens. Cool.
That was fun. Nice. Hey, let me ask you this.
Yeah.
How did you get the idea to, or what brought about starting to do these improvisations with folks on the podcast?
Well, so I guess it's it goes. Sorry, it goes back to the idea of thinking in real time. And I've always had a love for free improvisation, which actually got started with Steve Dembski at UW-Madison, because he introduced me to Cecil Taylor, and that the entire idea of playing free feels like communication. It's the same as having a conversation, especially with somebody who you haven't talked to in a long time. So it's that connection. It's that attempting to connect and think together. And so the doing it musically is kind of the other end of that. So we have a whole conversation that's free. It can go anywhere. And then we try and play some music that's also free and can go anywhere.
Very cool. You know what it reminds me of is the Roland Dians, actually, who's a name that will be familiar to classical guitarists, but maybe not to others. But he unfortunately passed away a few years ago, but was a great figure in the world of classical guitar, composer, arranger, performer. I was fortunate enough to see him play a few times. Every concert, he began with a free improvisation, solo free improvisation. Yeah. And then he would always do that. He would always play, of course, a lot of his own music and his own arrangements. And he would always play a piece by Fernando Sor, great early 19th century. So it was this really interesting kind of balance, I think, or complement, I guess, in some ways, of like again, with the way that I kind of view what I do is like it's rooted. The soar is kind of a tip of the hat to the tradition and the rootedness of that, and the free improvisation is kind of this embracing of one's own self individual expression and that and also communicating it with the audience. But of course the free improvisation does take on a different nature when it's with another musician,
right?
Because like you said, that, and I've not done it much or maybe at all, really, like a free improvisation with another person. Because mostly if I'm improvising in a structure like with a jazz tune where there's changes and you're playing over like a preset, at least you know the tune, the chord changes or whatever. And I played around maybe a little bit on my own, but to do it with another person is a totally different experience now.
Yeah.
And what a cool thing to do. And yeah, I love the idea and how it actually does. It ties into with the verbal conversation in that way. So really neat. Yeah. Very cool.
I think it was cool. And I think ours, it started off very similarly to our conversation, like getting used to each other and talking. And then we found a space and then it kind of like locked in and sunk in and it was good.
Yeah. Yeah. Great.
Cool, man. Well, thanks so much for talking with me today. It is fun to get to talk to you about musical ideas, to get to play a little bit. So what do you have going on now? What should people be looking out for? You have your YouTube channel.
That's maybe the main thing at the moment, since kind of wrapping up. Actually, Madison Classical Guitar Society. If folks happen to, well, I don't know if this will come out before that, but I'll be playing an event with them, kind of as the featured performer. Really, kind of my last performance here for a while.
Before Nashville,
and then kind of regrouping, cool. and all that. So hopefully, I'll be doing some live performing, maybe down in that area sometime by the fall, if not earlier. So live performance thing is kind of not yet like happening in full swing for me, partly because of all that. But the main thing is the YouTube, and I'm on Facebook and Instagram as well, Miles McConnell Guitar. But YouTube is where I'm kind of focusing a lot of my energy and just trying to continue to put out videos of my own arrangements mostly. So I may do some other things in the future. Like I had some requests for doing a tutorial video of one of the arrangements that I've done. So I'm probably going to do that at some point. But it's going to be a little bit of a shift in the type of thing that I've done up to this point, but I think it's good to do. It'll be, especially since I've had some requests, but I'm just continue to put out some arrangements, and I hopefully have a couple of others coming up before too long here. So please check that out. And love whatever feedback people have. Just let me know, what you think of the music that I'm doing. And, it's really interesting. I find like when you ask people for feedback, mostly people are usually pretty kind. I mean, if you're talking maybe to more of a teacher or somebody, they might tell you some more like critical things, which is also important to have some of that. But a lot of times, people, when I go and play live or whatever, they mostly tell you what they really liked the most.
Right.
Which is really cool. And it's very different, especially because, my programs are so like I play music, Japanese repertoire. I'm playing, a lot of Celtic arrangements of things, not only some of my own, but also other. I'm in more traditional classical stuff, some pop some arrangements. And so like, it's really interesting how like different people will really respond to different, I really enjoyed this particular thing. And it's interesting to get that feedback. And, there are some things that come up more than others. And it kind of ties back to like thinking about the audience. But it's just, I think ultimately, like, I feel like we do music because we think that there's value, that it has value, not only for ourselves, but also for other people. Yes. And so again, it just feels like, it's important to offer it up to people,
right?
And to have that in mind to some degree. So,
yeah, I agree. Yeah. All right. Well, everybody, check out Check out Miles's music. Check out his arrangements published on musicnotes.com and his videos on YouTube. Subscribe to his channels. They're all in the descriptions down below. Thanks so much for talking with me today, Miles.
Thank you, Anthony. What a pleasure.
All right. Thanks for listening or watching. Remember to check out Miles's YouTube and also his arrangements on musicnotes.com. And remember to like, leave a comment, and subscribe to my channel. And if you would like to consider supporting my content generally, please visit my Patreon page. Thanks. Bye.